Hi, who am I speaking with?
Andrew T. Bolser.
How old are you, Andrew?
17, I think.
All right. What happened?
Oh, guess the correct term would be, I snapped. I took my little gay bar there and planted it straight into my mother's back.
And what else happened, Andrew?
Well, she's lying on my floor. Oh, yeah, that's messy. And, my father woke up to her screams. I stabbed the out of him.
Given that it was Halloween, I think it's always in the mind of dispatch that there may be a prank or a hoax when a phone call comes in that is shocking and extraordinary and outside of what they might normally expect, particularly in this small community in a small town in Maine. And pretty quickly, I think the detective realizes that this is likely not a hoax. It starts to give us a very early indication that Andrew Bolser has a lot more going on to him psychologically than what may meet the eye initially.
Oh, I stabbed the dog, too. She was barking.
You stabbed the dog as well?
Yeah.
Okay.
Oh, a little one.
And you're sure they're dead? Can we get help to them right now?
Yeah, there's no helping them.
Bolser sounds jovial. He's laughing. You can almost see him smirking even though you can only hear him. The detective is trying to keep Bolser on the phone to give him some time to figure that out, determine if there are any other potential victims nearby, and to decide how best to move forward.
I need you to listen to me, Andrew. Is there anybody else in the house?
Well, my brother was.
It is an all-too-real Halloween horror story. A Winthrop teen is now charged with murdering a couple.
State police say they found the bodies of 47-year-old Alice Bolser and her husband Antonio Bolser inside their home on Pine Knoll Road in Winthrop.
They're very generous, kind people.
Antonio is a retired Coast Guardsman. Alice worked at the Winthrop Veterinary Hospital just down the road.
The couple's 17-year-old son has been charged with their murders.
Oh, he's a great kid, smart, brilliant, good in school, focused, was planning on going to college. So it doesn't make sense. It's a shocker that this could happen.
You're quite bright.
Yes.
He self-admits that he's not really connected to other people. He really lacks that ability to form interpersonal relationships. It could be because he doesn't have the empathy to do so. He just doesn't have even the motivation to have that kind of interpersonal interaction that most of us all crave and want. He doesn't desire it.
Is there anything bad about your childhood? Anything really traumatic in your background?
Nothing I can recall.
I'm wondering if you could sort of give me a little bit of clarity about how all of these events that bring you here occurred.
I woke up, got lunch. I cranked out my homework for about 4 hours or so. So I took a shower, painted my nails, and just sat about messing about for a while. Just kind of existing, I guess. My mother was, I think she was sleeping. She had a late night, went to a party up with one of her friends there. It was like the Halloween dress-up party, whatever.
Okay.
And my father was sound asleep on his chair, so.
Okay, and you're getting along with them fine?
Yeah. Yeah.
And then what happens?
And let's see, I just loaf about till 9 o'clock, then I go lay down in bed. I don't remember much. I just remember it being about 1:30 in the morning. I'm shaking there, and I have a knife in my hand.
So you're in your room from about 9 to 1:30 when you find yourself holding the K-bar.
I assume I did. It's really all blurry. I keep a lot of swords and whatnot in my room. This is the thing I'd like to have.
At this point, he's completely dissociated from what's going on. He has this clarity when it comes to what he did after he took a shower. Specifics, but as soon as it comes to the murder, it's all blurry, and he doesn't remember. And I assume that I commit the murder because I had a knife in my hand. These are things that somebody is doing to try to distance themselves. It seems like he's trying to come up with a reason why he's not responsible or trying to defer responsibility, but he doesn't quite know it yet.
Okay, and so what are you thinking at this point?
I'm not really thinking words, I guess. It's just occasionally I just have a tone going through my head.
A tone?
Yeah, it's, what was it? It was 13 kilohertz, I think I've figured it to be around there. So just a high-pitched, constant tone.
Okay. And how is your general physical feeling?
I just don't really feel anything. I do realize that I just, straight up murdered both of my parents there, so I know I should be having some sort of guilt or remorse. But honestly, at the moment, I just don't feel much of anything.
So it's unclear if he's starting to lay the grounds for being incompetent and that maybe he's hearing auditory hallucinations, or if he's talking about this tone as it's a symptom of tinnitus or some medical condition, and it has a parallel to him feeling agitated. We just don't know. But what is also very interesting to hear and shows that he has some self-awareness and insight is that he's saying to the detectives that he should feel bad. He understands that what he just did was significant by society's standards, but he's admitting he doesn't feel anything.
Okay. And can you tell me everything about
You're remembering a bit more clearly now. I was sitting there with a knife. I got up, walked to my parents' bedroom. Both of them were sleeping in there. I reached out my hand to my mother. She hugged me around the neck there and said something along the lines of, are you just having a rough evening? Come on, let's go to your room. I'll sit with you. And so I walk in with her holding the knife in my hand. I don't think she saw it. And I go to hug her, and as I do, I pull up the knife and snap there.
So just a few moments ago, we heard him describe being unclear of the details of the night, saying that it was blurry. But as they're unfolding now, they actually seem crystal clear. Balser sounds excited about recounting the story, almost proud of an accomplishment, like he's talking about a fish he caught in a tournament, but he's describing killing his mother.
I bring the knife down into her bag. She yells, and my father comes rushing in, and I lunged at him, I suppose. And he fights me back a little bit, trying to push me away and hit me, and I just swing and stab there.
Have you ever thought about killing your mom and dad before?
I'm sure the thought may have crossed my mind, but nothing too substantial ever came of it. I believe was the case there. It was more of a feeling of, pardon my language, just these people, rather than, you know, I'm actually going to kill them.
While there are aspects of Balser's decision-making that seem premeditated, planned, there's an impulsivity overall to what he's done. He's acknowledging that there really wasn't anything specific that set him off on that specific evening at that specific time. When Balser talks about his parents as these effing people, what that may give us is a glimmer into how Balser sees himself relative to most human beings. That maybe because of his intelligence and his academic performance and accomplishments, he's smarter than most people. He may feel he's smarter than both of his parents and disregards them accordingly. And this starts to show us some of that narcissism that we see sometimes in psychopathic individuals, where they think that they are above everybody else.
Is it my understanding that there's a dog that has been injured?
Oh, I forgot. Yeah, I did do that. It was the Chihuahua there, and so I silenced her, I suppose.
So how are you feeling right now as you recount the story to me? Are you feeling any emotion about it?
A little bit of guilt, I suppose it would be, but other than that, it's just kind of not much.
Okay. Did you feel affection towards them yesterday, let's say?
My mother would always be condescending in a way, and my father just honestly looked like he didn't care about it, so.
So Balser is starting to, show his true side again here and how he's failing to accept responsibility. So he's really blaming the victim here and saying that his mother was condescending. But at the same time, it makes me wonder if there was some narcissistic injury that he suffered. Like, he has such a high perception of himself and he's so superior that when she interacted with him, perhaps it came off as condescending, and he didn't like that because it insulted his ego.
I did definitely get that sense that you're such a distance from your dad.
No, it's he's a guy who lives in my house and eats all my food.
Right. And you think your mom was disappointed in you, or?
I honestly can't really read people. So I know she was kind of condescending and a bit almost hypocritical in the things she told me. She, was really being no better word than annoying, I suppose.
He acknowledges he doesn't read people very well, but the disconnect there is that he can't consider or contemplate that it's possible his feelings of contempt and annoyance at what he saw of his mother being hypocritical or hypercritical towards him were possibly just his perceptions and not actually based in fact. He can't draw that link, even though he acknowledges, I don't read people very well. And as a result, he makes a decision based on his rage.
Both of my parents are dead by this time. I figure I should call the police. So that's what I did.
Do you remember saying anything else?
I don't remember, but as I was sitting in the police car, I was just singing a few things to pass the time, I suppose.
Pass the time?
Yes.
Okay, what were you singing?
It's Luciano Pavarotti.
You had said that you hadn't really put thought into the aftermath, but as you're planning it, what does the completion of the goal look like?
Just both my parents dead. That was really my only goal thing.
I never told my brother about it because of fear of what he would do as well, because that's the way my parents had reacted, so.
So these reasons just accumulated one after the other.
Straight up fear, But it's more than that is I was always... My parents had raised me to kind of think that family comes first. You know, you don't do anything to make the family look bad, to hurt the family.
Going forward, what do you think is going to happen?
What I would like is I go in the courtroom, plead guilty, I go to the sentencing, they hand me a cookie and a glass of milk, and they say, you're free to go.
What you never hear from Andrea Balser is any acknowledgement about truly the seriousness of this when she's making light of it by drawing parallel to cookies and milk. It's misplaced. It's not an off-the-cuff statement. It really is some indication that Balser might use the words of remorse, but really has no clue what that's about.
But you do feel remorse.
I do. That's... Only a monster would not feel remorse at that kind of thing. You know, I'm not happy that all of this happened. It just traded one hell for another, you know? And I just... If I could take it all back, I would, in a heartbeat.
She says, well, I'm not happy this happened, as if she has suffered in this scenario, when in fact, again, she's the one that inflicted the harm.
While it's not uncommon for adults who have been abused as children to avoid disclosing that abuse, the timing of Balser's disclosure doesn't really support that that is what happened, that there was a delay in reporting. It's important to remember at the outset of this investigation, detectives...
Address emergency?
I found something in my son's closet wrapped in a plastic bag.
Okay, what was it?
I think it's a human food.
Why do you think it's that?
Because it looks like it's on ear.
Is your son there now?
I'm out back, so I can't tell you exactly, but I think he's still outside. He will most likely go willingly.
What's his name?
His name is Brian, B-R-I-A-N. Last name is Cohees.
Even when you have seasoned detectives and seasoned police officers, there's very little that prepares a human being for seeing a harrowing crime scene like this, where a human being has been treated with such a level of disregard that it just tells us this is a high-risk case. And it's somebody who has some level of psychiatric disturbance to be able to do that to another human being.
You want me to keep talking to him?
Sure, yeah, I'll talk to him. What do you want now?
To start back at the beginning and go slow and tell me as many details as you can remember.
So, because I mean, I'm already going to jail for this 15 years probably.
I have no idea.
Because
we're at the beginning now.
It's murder. I mean, I'm going to jail for 20 probably, but so I figure, why fight it?
Cohees displaying classic psychopathic tendencies where he has absolutely no remorse, no feelings of guilt. He's not offering up any of that. But what he is offering up is how much time he's going to do because of this murder. He's really not identifying what the value of a life is. He doesn't really understand. He's just saying, oh, okay, I'm going to go away for a couple years. There's no empathy towards the victim whatsoever. No understanding of life, feelings, emotions, absolutely none.
Okay. So what's important to me is to learn as much about you and what you did and as I can. Well, as many details as you can give me, the better.
I drive a 2007 Ford 500.
Okay.
And I keep a small 18-inch bat in there for self-defense, and a large kitchen knife in the glove box, both for self-defense. And let's see, yeah, it was the night of February 27th. It was a full moon, and I am in a bad state of mind at that time. I have major depressive disorder, so I am not thinking, I shall say, positively.
He's announcing there are weapons in the car, and I'm a sick person. So we could see this as already setting a new frame in the conversation with the interviewer and controlling where it's going to go and then framing how it should be viewed. He's already laying out the stages for what could be described as an excuse or a defense, sort of putting the blame somewhere else.
You start off here.
So we were at the bridge?
Yes, I was at the bridge. There was a road underneath, right? Under the overpass. And I was driving along, and I see a shape here on the railway track. And I'm like, that's a homeless person. So I grab my knife. I put on 3 layers of gloves because plastic gloves can betray their users because they're so thin, those vinyl gloves, by imprinting your fingerprints through. I pulled back the canvas and I stabbed his neck. He was panicking at first. He was saying, "What are you doing? What are you doing? Why? Ah!" And I just kept on stabbing his neck. Is it okay if I do demonstrate?
Oh, yeah.
This is him. I was straddled on top of him like this.
As he starts to talk about the details of his attack on the victim, he seems to be getting titillated and aroused by this. And not aroused in the sexual sense of the word, but aroused in the sense that the adrenaline is starting to course.
And he couldn't fight back. And during the time I was growling and making animalistic noises, it was actually surprisingly easy. I was barely breaking a sweat. I thought, oh, this guy, he's going to be tough. But no, it was actually surprisingly easy.
Why were you doing that?
I suppose it was a frenzy.
Okay.
I was so excited. So rushed up on adrenaline, and every guy was just, woo! And I paused, and he's like, "Why are you doing this?" And I said, "I've been wanting to do this for a long time. Murder someone." And then I continued. The whole ordeal lasted about a minute and a half. All the while, no, actually, after I killed him, I just couldn't stop saying, "Stinky, dirty, dirty, stinky, stinky." I wasn't smelling anything, but...
And why were you saying that?
I suppose it was just me speaking out my mind at that moment. It was a pouring out of the mind. And then, let's see, I cut open his belly to see his guts. They're really pink. Sorry, that was morbid. And then I cut off his head.
He's not attached to the fact that Warren Barnes is a human being he killed, and that he went on to then dehumanize and humiliate his body, his remains. It sounds like it's something out of a horror movie, but what we also get a sense of is that Brian Cohey was entertained. This was play acting for him. This was him going through the motions of creating his own horror film, creating his own set of memories.
And then I took the head, put it in a leftover pizza box from the dinner a few nights ago. And then I took the hands, put them in the back, drove home, hid the hands and head in my room. I put the outfit I murdered him in the washer.
Wearing, or?
Yeah. I was wearing a dark blue jumper suit. Those things that the one piece zips up.
Okay. Any reason you were wearing a dark blue one-piece jumper suit?
Well, You know the movie Halloween, Michael Myers?
Mm-hmm.
He wears one of those, and for Halloween, last year, I bought that as a costume to find the mask in my room. And I just associated that piece of that article of clothing with violence. That's why I was wearing it.
Many people with psychopathy, since they don't appreciate the world around them like other people do, may incorporate the ideas they've seen in a film into the act that they act out, because the fantasy world is more interesting to them than the actual world of human relations that they live in.
You said you took, was it the head and the hands?
Mm-hmm.
And what did you put them in?
Well, there's a 3 rule for bodies.
Okay, tell me about that.
3 hours, rigor mortis sets in, the body stiffens. 3 days, the body starts to stink because of decomposition.
Mm-hmm.
3 weeks, the body is starting to seriously decompose.
Right.
3 months, the body is unrecognizable. 3 years, it turns into a skeleton.
And may I ask how you know that?
I've always had a fascination with forensics and with anatomy and physiology.
Cohee proudly talks about what he knows and what he has become a learner of, which is the forensic sciences and how the criminal mind thinks. And he's taken copious notes on various serial killers. What is ironic is that he didn't take many steps to hide his evidence. And his own sort of missteps in his decision-making, the fact that his mother found these remains in the home, speaks to somebody who was looking to get caught, because it's not spectacular if it only lives in your head.
I actually think you're really articulate. And you talked about you were just kind of in a bad space that night.
It was, yes.
Okay. Why were you in a bad space?
For years, I was wondering what murder would feel like. Because read like Ted Bundy and the Zodiac, they all say murder is the best feeling in the world. So I'm like, I'm going to try that. So for some time I had been wondering when it would happen. I always knew I would be in this building, whether it was as a criminal or a police officer.
I think there's a lot in that comment, right? The criminal is someone who's not obeying social rules. Police officer is someone who has a lot of authority over other people. But I think it's more of the access to people and power and control issue that would be appealing to someone with psychopathy.
Were you worried about, like, leaving evidence behind or being caught?
Well, I was figuring the police don't, this is not to be taken offense, but police, they don't seem to care as much about high-risk individuals, homeless people, prostitutes, etc. So I was deliberately looking for someone who lived that type of life.
Okay.
And I found a homeless person, and the original goal was just leave him there.
Cohee's choosing a victim that he thinks no one will know is missing, so he can actually complete the act of killing. This is a new thing for him. He hasn't done this before. So he doesn't want to engage in a struggle. He doesn't want it to be interfered with. He wants to accomplish this act to get that feeling of excitement and arousal.
Okay. So before this guy, how close had you come in the past?
Not at all.
Not at all? You just drive around and...
Yeah, look, just try and find
you see anybody interesting?
No. Well, occasionally when you see girls walking down the street, I take a glance at them. I'm quite inept with women. I'm being honest, I'm no Casanova. But half of me says, I want to take that girl home and make her feel nice. And the other half of me, it's just like what Ed said, is I want to see what her head looks like on a stick.
How about animals? Have you practiced on anything?
Yes.
It's a pretty big step.
Tell us about that.
Person.
It was 2018 Halloween. A stray black cat had been coming around our house This was before I moved into my mom's. This was at my dad's. And I was thinking about killing him. I then hid the body in a shoebox, and then I disposed it in the trash and got away with it.
And when did you start thinking about killing people?
6 months ago.
Cohy talks about his experience killing a cat, and it's a miniature prelude to killing a human and cutting them open and taking their head off. And we do see that in many instances of people who are psychopathic, who then go on to kill people. They've done rehearsal. They've tortured animals, or they've hurt other kids. Those are all sort of the baby steps toward the bigger act of killing a human.
Was it like something all of a sudden one day you woke up and thought, I'll kill someone, or was it a gradual?
It was gradual, I think. Well, in high school, last year, my parents found a kit I had been assembling. It had hammers, shovels, knives, large zip ties, duct tape, saw. That was meant for hurting people. And it was an ultimatum where if I didn't throw it away, they would call the police.
What we know about Brian Cohy's time in school and as a student is that there were a multitude of red flags. Reviewing some of the entries from Cohy's journals, they can best be summarized as a self-created encyclopedia on murder, on harm of human beings, and glorifying psychopathic behavior. There was also an incident of a third-degree assault where he created a homemade weapon, a homemade mace, and swung it around into one of the other students' heads.
So what was the plan back then?
The plan was to go find, because there's no prostitutes in Grand Junction, I don't think. Have you ever had any sex crimes?
There's not prostitutes like 5 of them standing alongside the road, but there's prostitutes in Grand Junction.
The plan was to go with one of them and have them come with me. And then the plan was to subdue them and tie them up and then torture her. That would have been sexual in nature. This was just to see what it felt like. But that would have been sexual.
He was practicing, because if he can perfect that, then he can take that to the next level and add in that sexual component. And that would make sense for someone like Cohy, who doesn't have any history of personal relationships, let alone with females. And so this might be a way of him seeing what it's like to be with a female, but controlling and abusing them and getting them to the point where they are in such fear of their life that it's also giving him sexual gratification off of that.
What did it feel like?
It was intense. It was a rush of adrenaline.
Well, did you enjoy it or not enjoy it?
Did I enjoy it? I don't know. Just sort of neutral to the whole thing. I didn't enjoy it, but I didn't hate it.
What might be most disturbing when Cohy talks about how it felt for him, he's a bit deflated. Cohy's desire to seek a thrill and get a high or an adrenaline rush, it didn't even really last. So what happens for a person like Brian Cohy if that thrill seeking and that adrenaline rush is short-lived? After doing that much destruction to a human being, that part I think is incredibly scary to think about.
So when you first started looking for him, was that your intention, like when you started?
Yeah, when I was driving, I was always looking for someone.
Okay. So given what you've been thinking about and all the other things, people have even thought you wanted to be a serial killer?
Only if it brought me fame. For a while, I was willing to do anything, good or bad. Just to gain notoriety, fame, influence.
A Mesa County teen accused in the brutal murder of a local homeless man has pleaded not guilty by reason of insanity. 19-year-old Brian Cohy entered the plea in person during his arraignment in Mesa County Court this morning. During a hearing in September, an investigator told the court he believed Cohey suffered from mental illness and depression, among other conditions.
In general, when we think about competency evaluations, we're thinking about, at the time of the crime, did they understand the difference between right and wrong? Brian Cohey understood if he was caught, he'd be in trouble. And this is somebody that, from the outset of when he left home, took steps to avoid being detected.
The first thing they remember is the silence, the kind that presses against the ears after a scream has already happened, the kind that lingers in hallways long after the police tape goes up, the kind that turns an ordinary New York apartment building into a crime scene frozen in time. And it starts on a winter night in 1987 when the city is loud everywhere except on the 4th floor of a brick walk-up in Queens, where a door is ajar and a radio is still on, playing low, like someone meant to come back and turn it off. The hallway smells of boiled coffee and damp wool coats. The elevator is broken again, and no one notices anything wrong until morning, until a neighbor knocks and gets no answer, until someone leans in and sees the light still burning, sees the stillness that doesn't belong. Inside, the apartment looks interrupted, not destroyed, a chair slightly pulled back from the table, a coat draped over the arm like it was dropped mid-motion, a half-written note on the counter, pen uncapped, ink drying into nothing. There is no sign of struggle, no shattered glass, no blood spatter that announces itself, just absence, sudden and absolute, the kind that makes detectives lower their voices without being told. The woman who lived here has vanished, and within hours the words start to circulate, first quietly, then louder, then stamped across the city's collective imagination, missing, mysterious, cold case in the making. Her name becomes a headline, then a photograph pinned to corkboards and telephone poles, then a face on the evening news framed by urgent graphics and a toll-free number. She is 29, works late, keeps to herself, known by sight more than by conversation, the kind of neighbor people recognize but don't really know, and that detail will matter later, though no one realizes it yet. Detectives walk the apartment inch by inch, photographing the mundane, cataloging the ordinary as evidence, because in cases like this, the smallest detail can scream the loudest. The radio is noted. The note is bagged. The windows are locked from the inside. There is no forced entry. Her purse is missing, but so are her keys, which could mean nothing or everything. Outside, snow begins to fall, soft and indifferent, erasing footprints before anyone can decide which ones matter. The building itself becomes a suspect in its own way, a vertical village of thin walls and shared spaces, a place where people hear things and don't ask questions, where footsteps blend together and doors open and close all night long. Detectives knock on every door, ask the same questions, write the same answers, nod at the same shrugs. Did you hear anything? No. Did you see anyone? No. What time did you last see her? Not sure. Maybe yesterday. Maybe the day before. Time blurs quickly when nothing seems important until it suddenly is. One neighbor mentions a man in the hallway, maybe tall, quiet, carrying groceries. Another recalls an argument weeks ago, or maybe it was on television, or maybe it was nothing. Statements pile up without connecting, like puzzle pieces from different boxes. The case moves fast at first, driven by urgency and cameras, by the unspoken fear that if a woman can disappear from her own apartment without a sound, then no door is really locked. Police retrace her steps, interview coworkers, scan phone records, comb through her routine, the coffee shop she visits, the subway line she takes, the late shifts that blur into early mornings. They find no threats, no obvious enemies, no dramatic backstory that fits neatly into a crime narrative. She is ordinary in a way that unsettles them, responsible, predictable, careful. The kind of person crime statistics forget until it's too late. Days turn into weeks, weeks into months, and the tone shifts from urgent to concerned to quietly resigned. The headlines change. The phone stops ringing. The investigation slows, then stalls, then hardens into something colder, something heavier, something that refuses to disappear even as everyone else tries to move on. By the end of the year, the words cold case appear for the first time, slipped into a sentence almost apologetically, as if naming it might make it real. The file grows thick with reports and thin with hope. Evidence is re-examined, then shelved. Leads dry up. Tips come in late at night from people who swear they know something now, years later, after a dream or a memory or a drink too many, but none of it sticks. The apartment is cleaned, repainted, rented to someone new who doesn't know what happened there and doesn't ask. Life in the building resumes its rhythm, but something has shifted, something unspoken, a shared awareness that evil doesn't always announce itself, that sometimes it lives quietly, patiently, close enough to hear the radio through the wall. The years pass and the city changes around the case, new crimes, new fears, new faces cycling through precincts where younger detectives flip through old files like artifacts from another era. The photographs look dated now, the hairstyles, the cars in the background, the grainy quality of the film, but the questions remain sharp. What happened after she turned on the radio? Who walked out of that apartment, and how did they do it without being seen? Why was there no struggle, no noise, no trace? The absence becomes the loudest clue of all, a void that investigators circle again and again without crossing. Occasionally, the case resurfaces in a brief article or a late-night segment, framed as one of New York's enduring mysteries, a reminder that not all stories end with an arrest. Then, quietly, decades later, something stirs. A box is reopened. A name is underlined. Technology has changed, databases expanded, patterns that once hid in plain sight now glow under digital scrutiny. A fingerprint once considered unusable is scanned again. A statement dismissed as irrelevant is read with fresh eyes. The building's old tenant list is reconstructed, apartment by apartment, floor by floor, and a detail emerges that had been there all along, waiting. A man who lived next door. A man whose name appears in the margins of the file more than once, always close, always peripheral, never central enough to demand attention. A man who fit into the building the way furniture does, present but unnoticed, familiar enough to feel invisible. In 1987, he was interviewed like everyone else, asked the same questions, gave the same calm answers. He heard nothing. He saw nothing. He knew her only by sight. He was helpful, cooperative, forgettable. Over the years, his name drifted further from the center of the investigation, buried under more urgent leads, more dramatic possibilities. But now, with time as both enemy and ally, that proximity feels different. Living next door is no longer just a detail. It's a vantage point. It's access. It's opportunity wrapped in normalcy. Detectives begin to wonder what it means to be that close to a mystery for that long, to share a wall with a disappearance, to go on living as if nothing happened. The community reacts with a mix of disbelief and dread as whispers start again, the old headlines resurrected with new urgency, the phrase cold case paired with words like breakthrough and shock. People who lived in the building back then replay their memories, searching for missed signs, strange moments, doors that closed too quietly. The idea that the answer might have been next door all along lands like a punch to the chest, not because it's dramatic, but because it's plausible. Because it suggests that the most terrifying mysteries don't hide in the shadows, but in plain sight, smiling politely in the hallway, returning borrowed tools, carrying groceries up the stairs. As investigators dig deeper, the past and present blur, old interviews layered over new evidence, timelines tightened, assumptions questioned. The man's life unfolds under scrutiny, ordinary on the surface, punctuated by gaps that might mean nothing or everything. Friends describe him as quiet. Neighbors say he kept to himself. No criminal record worth noting. No obvious motive that leaps off the page. And yet, the case pulls toward him with a gravity that's hard to ignore, as if the truth has been orbiting this one detail for decades, waiting for the right moment to snap into focus. But for now, in this moment, nothing is resolved. The file is open. The questions are alive again. The building stands where it always has, brick and mortar holding secrets in its walls. The radio from that night exists only in memory, the song lost to time, but the silence it left behind still echoes. A woman vanished without a trace. A community learned how thin the line between normal and nightmare can be. And somewhere in the space between suspicion and certainty, between what is known and what is only suspected, the cold case breathes, refusing to rest, pulling everyone back to that winter night when a door was left open and a mystery moved in next door. The file doesn't sleep, even when everyone else does, and in part 2 the story tightens, not with answers, but with pressure, the kind that builds when too many coincidences start leaning in the same direction. Detectives return to the building as it exists now, older, louder, layered with decades of lives stacked on top of each other, and they walk the same stairs, count the same steps, measure the same narrow hallway where sound travels strangely, sometimes carrying a whisper, sometimes swallowing a shout. They stand between 2 doors that once shared a wall and imagine how thin that barrier really was, how easily a voice could pass through, how footsteps could be timed, how familiarity could become camouflage. The idea is unsettling not because it's exotic, but because it's simple, because nothing about it requires a break-in or a struggle or a dramatic moment that would have alerted anyone else. Just proximity. Just access. Just time. Back in 1987, the man next door was a background character, a reliable extra in a city full of them, and the original reports reflect that indifference. His interview transcript is short. He works regular hours. He comes home late some nights. He didn't hear the radio. He didn't hear an argument. He noticed nothing unusual. It's all there in black and white, answers delivered without hesitation, without embellishment, the kind of testimony that slides easily into a file because it doesn't demand follow-up. But now, reading it decades later, detectives linger on the phrasing, the cadence, the confidence with which he claims to remember nothing at all. Memory fades, they know that. But sometimes, so does guilt, and that's harder to quantify. They reconstruct the night minute by minute, not because they expect to find something new, but because repetition has a way of exposing fractures. She comes home from work. She turns on the radio. She starts to write a note. Something interrupts her. There is no sign of panic, no overturned furniture, no broken skin left behind. That absence suggests trust, or at least familiarity, someone who didn't trigger alarm bells, someone who didn't need to force their way in, someone who might have knocked, or already had a reason to be there. The list of people who fit that profile is short, and it keeps circling back to the same place, the same wall, the same door. Old neighbors are tracked down, some eager to talk, others hesitant, their memories filtered through years of distance and self-protection. One recalls hearing the radio through the wall often, late at night, the sound bleeding softly into his own apartment. Another remembers seeing the man next door in the hallway around the same time the woman disappeared, carrying a bag, maybe trash, maybe laundry, maybe something heavier. No one can say for sure. No one wants to be wrong. But the collective uncertainty itself becomes part of the narrative, a chorus of almosts and maybes that paint a picture without sharp edges. It's not evidence, not in the courtroom sense, but it's atmosphere, and atmosphere matters when you're trying to understand how something like this could happen unnoticed. Technology enters the story like a late-arriving witness, indifferent to nostalgia, ruthless in its precision. A partial print lifted from the apartment back in 1987, once dismissed as smudged beyond use, is scanned again, enhanced, compared against databases that didn't exist when shoulder pads and cassette tapes were still in style. It doesn't produce a clean match, not a name that can be announced at a press conference, but it narrows the field, excludes dozens of possibilities, and quietly keeps one door open. A hair found on the couch, preserved in an evidence envelope yellowed with age, is tested with methods that border on science fiction to the detectives who first worked the case. The results are inconclusive, frustratingly so, but they don't contradict the emerging theory either. The evidence, like the memories, refuses to settle into something definitive. As the focus sharpens, the man's past is examined with a thoroughness it never received before. Employment records, addresses, relationships, small inconsistencies that seemed irrelevant in real time now glow under scrutiny. There are gaps in his timeline, periods where no one can say exactly where he was or what he was doing, but that's true of almost everyone, especially in a city that swallows people whole. Friends describe him as reserved, maybe awkward, someone who preferred routine over risk. Former coworkers remember nothing alarming. No history of violence, no trail of complaints, nothing that screams danger. And yet, the absence of red flags doesn't reassure investigators the way it once might have. Sometimes the most disturbing cases are the ones where the suspect looks exactly like everyone else. The media senses blood in the water and circles back, reviving the story with a modern gloss, pairing grainy black and white photos with sharp graphics and ominous music. Cold case revisited, they say. New suspect emerges. The building's address is spoken again on air, and residents who weren't even alive in 1987 feel the chill of inheriting someone else's unfinished nightmare. The man next door, now older, now aware that his name is being whispered again, offers no public reaction, retreating into silence that can be read as dignity or fear depending on who's watching. Investigators insist they're following evidence, not headlines, but they can't deny the pressure. This time, the city is listening. They attempt to map opportunity, drawing lines between routines, schedules, the rhythms of the building itself. The walls were thin. The floors creaked. Someone attentive could tell when a neighbor was alone, distracted, unguarded. The radio, once just background noise, becomes a potential cover, a way to mask other sounds, intentional or not. It's a chilling thought that something so ordinary could be repurposed into a shield for violence, that the soundtrack of a quiet evening could double as a curtain. The theory gains traction not because it's sensational, but because it fits too well, sliding into the negative space left by the lack of evidence. But for every detail that seems to point in one direction, another pushes back. There's still no body, no weapon, no confession, no witness who can say, with certainty, I saw him do this. The legal standard looms large, an immovable line between suspicion and proof. Detectives argue among themselves, some convinced they're finally close, others wary of tunnel vision, of forcing a narrative onto a case that has resisted resolution for decades. They revisit other possibilities, other people in her life, other paths she might have taken, other outcomes too grim to imagine. The cold case refuses to be cornered, slipping sideways whenever someone thinks they have a grip. The woman at the center of it all threatens to fade beneath the weight of speculation, but investigators fight that impulse, grounding themselves in who she was, not just how she vanished. They reread her notes, talk again to family members who have aged alongside the unanswered questions, people who learn to live with uncertainty as a permanent fixture. For them, the renewed attention is a double-edged sword, a mix of hope and exhaustion, the possibility of truth reopening wounds that never fully healed. They want answers, but they've learned to fear false ones, conclusions that satisfy the public appetite without honoring reality. As winter approaches again, echoing the season when it all began, the case reaches a strange equilibrium, balanced between momentum and doubt. The man next door remains a figure of interest, his proximity an undeniable fact, his involvement still unproven. Detectives prepare for interviews that may or may not yield anything new, aware that time has a way of sanding down edges, of turning sharp memories into smooth, defensible forgetfulness. They know that if this case ever breaks, it won't be with a dramatic flourish, but with a quiet detail finally given the weight it deserves. And so the story presses forward, not toward resolution, but deeper into the fog, where every step feels significant and every misstep could send it spiraling back into dormancy. The building stands unchanged, a witness that cannot speak. The radio song remains unknown. The wall between those two apartments feels thinner with every passing day. And somewhere within that narrow space between certainty and doubt, the cold case tightens its grip, reminding everyone involved that living next door to a mystery doesn't mean you understand it, only that you can never fully escape it. Time does something cruel in Part 4. It stretches and compresses at the same time, years folding in on themselves as investigators realize the case is no longer just about what happened in 1987, but about everything that happened afterward, because nothing did. The absence becomes its own event, a long, slow aftermath that seeps into records, memories, and lives. Detectives sit in fluorescent-lit rooms late at night, the old files spread open like a map that leads everywhere and nowhere, and they begin asking a different question. Not who could have done this, but how someone could live so close to a vanishing and leave nothing behind. Not even a rumor solid enough to cling to. That question changes the temperature of the room. It reframes the man next door not as a suspect in a moment, but as a presence across time. They dig into his movements after the disappearance, the years that followed like a shadow epilogue to the crime. He didn't flee. He didn't spiral. He stayed in the city for a while, then moved again, each relocation unremarkable, each address blending into the next. No sudden cash. No abrupt lifestyle changes. No dramatic reinvention. It's the kind of continuity that prosecutors hate and defense attorneys love, because it suggests normalcy, because it resists narrative. But to some investigators, it feels wrong in a different way. If he was involved, they argue, this is exactly how you'd do it. You'd stay. You'd age. You'd let time do the hiding for you. Old acquaintances are re-interviewed, people who once shared drinks or office space with him, now older, more cautious, less sure of their recollections. They describe him as controlled, polite, a man who didn't raise his voice, who didn't overshare, who seemed to exist just outside the emotional weather of the room. One former coworker remembers a comment, made years after the disappearance, a casual remark about how people can live next to each other for years without really knowing anything. At the time, it sounded philosophical. Now it lands differently. The problem is memory is a slippery witness, easily influenced by what comes later, and detectives know better than to treat hindsight as fact. Still, they write it down. Still, they underline it. The case file starts to fill with marginalia, handwritten notes from different decades, different hands, all circling the same themes: access, familiarity, silence. A behavioral analyst is brought in, not to profile a killer in the abstract, but to assess the feasibility of the theory that someone could remove a person from a small apartment without alerting anyone else. The answer is unsettlingly simple. Yes, especially if there was trust. Especially if there was no immediate violence. Especially if the goal was control, not chaos. Especially if the building itself helped, its thin walls and shared noises creating a constant, unremarkable hum. Attention returns to the note on the counter, the half-written sentence that ends mid-thought. Analysts debate whether it was interrupted suddenly or paused voluntarily. The ink shows no signs of a jolt, no jagged line where panic might have struck. That suggests calm, at least initially. Someone arrived who didn't set off alarms. Someone she didn't need to run from. Someone who belonged in that space enough to stop the sentence without force. The implications ripple outward, narrowing the circle again, tightening it until it feels claustrophobic. Meanwhile, the city reacts in waves. Each new article sparks a brief flare of outrage, curiosity, armchair theories lighting up late-night radio and online forums. People argue about guilt and innocence as if proximity alone were a verdict. Others push back, warning against the danger of turning a neighbor into a monster without proof. The man next door becomes an idea as much as a person, a symbol of the fear that the worst threats aren't strangers, they're familiar faces we stop seeing clearly. He remains silent publicly, advised to say nothing, to let the process play out, but silence has its own volume, and in a case like this, it's deafening. Investigators attempt one of the hardest tasks in cold case work, separating what feels true from what can be proven. They stage walkthroughs, recreating the apartment as it would have looked in 1987, furniture placed according to photographs, distances measured, lines of sight traced. They test theories quietly, methodically, without cameras, without commentary. Could someone have crossed that threshold without resistance? Yes. Could Could they have exited unseen? Possibly. Could they have done it alone? That's where the room grows quiet. It's not impossible, but it requires precision, planning, and nerve. It requires someone who knows the building, the routines, the rhythms of the people around them. It requires someone next door. Yet the case resists the final step. No matter how compelling the circumstantial web becomes, it never tightens into a knot. The legal reality intrudes again and again, a hard reminder that suspicion is not justice. Prosecutors review the file and ask the same questions they've asked before. Where is the body? Where is the physical link? Where is the moment you can point to and say, this is where everything changed? Without that, the case hovers in a gray zone, too strong to ignore, too weak to close. The woman's family watches from a distance, weary but attentive. For them, the man next door is not an abstraction. He's a face attached to a possibility, a name that could finally anchor their grief to something concrete. They attend meetings, listen to updates, nod through explanations about standards of proof and evidentiary thresholds. They've learned the language of caution fluently, even as it hurts. They don't ask for certainty anymore. They ask for honesty. Are we closer? Are we further away? The answers are never simple. As months turn into another year of renewed investigation, fatigue sets in. Detectives rotate off the case, replaced by others who must learn it from paper and secondhand passion. Each transition risks losing nuance, the small instincts that don't translate into reports. To counter that, veterans sit down with newcomers and talk through the case not as a checklist, but as a story, emphasizing where it feels wrong, where it pulls, where it refuses to let go. They describe the hallway, the radio, the wall. They describe the man next door, not accusingly, but carefully, as if handling something fragile and dangerous at the same time. And then there's the possibility no one likes to say out loud. What if the truth is smaller than expected? What if there is no grand reveal, no dramatic arrest, no moment where decades of silence finally break? What if the cold case remains exactly that, a space where evidence thins and imagination rushes in to fill the gaps? The thought hangs heavy because it means the community may never get the release it wants, only the lesson it didn't ask for. In quiet moments, alone with the file, some investigators admit what keeps them coming back. It's not just the mystery. It's the idea that someone could disappear so completely while the person closest in proximity carried on, untouched by suspicion for so long. That idea gnaws at them, challenges their understanding of how crime is supposed to work. It suggests a world where accountability is not automatic, where being next door is both ordinary and potentially catastrophic. It suggests that the line between safety and danger might be nothing more than drywall and habit. As Part 4 closes, the case stands in a familiar, uneasy place. The man next door remains uncharged. The evidence remains circumstantial. The theory remains compelling. The building remains occupied. Life continues in layers above and below the apartment where it all stopped. And the cold case, older now but no less heavy, settles back into its waiting posture, not dormant, not resolved, just watching as it has for decades, daring someone to finally see what has always been right there on the other side of the wall. By Part 5, the case feels less like an investigation and more like a slow excavation, each layer of time peeled back with care, because one wrong move could collapse everything beneath it. Detectives begin to understand that if the truth exists, it's not hiding in a dramatic act, but in repetition, in the patterns so ordinary they were overlooked for decades. They stop asking what happened that night and start asking what happened every night before it, every quiet interaction, every shared moment of hallway politeness that never made it into a report. The man next door becomes a constant presence in the room even when he isn't there, his routines mapped out not to accuse, but to understand how normalcy can blur into opportunity without anyone noticing. They revisit the building's maintenance logs, an unglamorous trove of details that rarely make headlines. Complaints about noise, requests for repairs, notes about access to apartments when tenants weren't home. It's tedious work, the kind that doesn't feel like progress until suddenly it does. A record shows the man next door had reported an issue with his heating weeks before the disappearance, granting a legitimate reason for him to be in and out, talking to neighbors, familiarizing himself with schedules. It proves nothing on its own, but it adds texture to the picture, a sense of how easily boundaries could blur in a place where everyone shared walls and problems. Investigators look closely at social overlap, the thin threads that connect people who claim not to know each other. Did they ever speak beyond a nod? Did she ever ask him to hold a package, to watch the door, to help with something small? In apartment buildings, trust is often transactional and fleeting, a favor exchanged without names or expectations. Friends of the woman recall her as cautious, but kind, not reckless, not naive, but not cold either. She lived alone. She managed her life well. She didn't broadcast fear. That combination, detectives realize, can be mistaken for availability by the wrong person. The man next door is approached again, this time with the weight of years behind the questions. The interview is calm, controlled, recorded with modern equipment that captures every pause, every shift in tone. He answers as he always has, steady, unflustered, insisting he remembers nothing unusual. He doesn't bristle. He doesn't overreact. He doesn't offer theories or speculation. He stays in his lane, and that restraint is either discipline or deflection depending on who's listening. When asked about the radio, he shrugs. He doesn't remember hearing it. When asked about that night specifically, he says it blends with others. Work, home, sleep. Routine. The kind of answer that makes sense and yet leaves a hollow space behind it. Outside the interrogation room, detectives debate. Some see his composure as confidence born of innocence. Others see it as practice. The danger of cold cases is that time gives everyone, investigators included, too much room to project meaning onto behavior. They remind themselves of that constantly, anchoring discussions to facts, to documents, to what can be proven. And yet, they can't ignore how the case seems to orbit him, how every new angle somehow bends back toward that shared wall. Attention shifts briefly to the possibility of a second person, not as an alternative suspect, but as a theoretical necessity. Could someone have helped? Could someone have known? The idea is explored and mostly discarded, not because it's impossible, but because it complicates a scenario that already fits too well. There is no evidence of coordination, no communications, no shared alibi that suggests a partner. If this was done, investigators conclude, it was likely done alone, quietly, efficiently. That conclusion is both clarifying and disturbing. The media continues its cycle, intensity rising and falling with each rumor of progress. The phrase "lived next door" becomes shorthand, repeated until it feels like a verdict. The public imagination fills in gaps with certainty the evidence can't support. Some demand an arrest. Others demand restraint. The police department walks a narrow line, releasing just enough information to maintain credibility without poisoning a potential case. Every statement is parsed, every word weighed, because in a story this old, perception can become its own kind of evidence, shaping memories, influencing testimony, altering what people think they saw or heard decades ago. The woman's family grows quieter as the spotlight brightens. They've learned that hope is loud at first and heavy later. They listen to updates, ask careful questions, try not to let themselves imagine closure too vividly. For them, the man next door is still a stranger, a figure defined by proximity rather than proof, and that ambiguity is exhausting. They want resolution, but they don't want a mistake to be the thing that finally ends the story. They've lived too long with half answers to accept a false full one. Behind the scenes, investigators chase a final thread from the early days of the case, something mentioned once and never pursued. A report of a strong, unfamiliar odor in the building days after the disappearance, dismissed at the time as trash or plumbing. The report is vague, secondhand, unreliable. But in a case starved for physical outcomes, even the faintest sensory detail is reconsidered. They revisit old city records, sanitation schedules, maintenance work orders, anything that might contextualize that smell. It leads nowhere definitive, but it reinforces a grim possibility that whatever happened ended quickly and decisively, leaving little behind for chance to reveal. The case reaches a strange emotional midpoint here, not closer to an answer, but closer to understanding the shape of the unknown. Investigators accept that they may never prove what they strongly suspect. They prepare for that outcome even as they push against it, because giving up is not an option, but neither is pretending certainty exists where it doesn't. The cold case teaches patience in the harshest way, by offering just enough coherence to keep going and just enough resistance to prevent arrival. As Part 5 draws to a close, the story feels heavier, not with new revelations, but with accumulated weight. The man next door remains free, unchanged by the scrutiny except in the way all attention leaves a mark. The building continues to house lives unaware of the history pressed into its walls. The woman remains missing, her absence now measured in decades rather than days. And the case itself settles into a tense stillness, like a held breath, waiting to see whether persistence will finally crack the silence, or whether this mystery will endure as a reminder that sometimes the most unsettling truths are not hidden far away, but lived beside, ignored, and carried forward by time. By Part 6, the investigation begins to feel like it's pressing against an invisible ceiling, not because there is nothing left to examine, but because everything left is intangible. Detectives call it the wall, the point where logic and law stop overlapping, where what makes sense no longer guarantees what can be proven. The man next door remains at the center of that pressure, not as a declared villain, but as a gravitational force the case cannot escape. Every attempt to move outward, to reframe the mystery from another angle, bends back toward him, toward that shared hallway, toward the ordinary intimacy of proximity. They decide to confront time itself, treating it not as an obstacle but as evidence. What does it mean to live for decades with an unanswered disappearance next door? They review recordings of his earlier interviews, now digitized, voices from different eras layered side by side. His tone is consistent. His denials are consistent. Even his phrasing barely changes. To some, that consistency suggests truth. To others, it suggests rehearsal so complete it's become second nature. The problem is both interpretations are plausible, and plausibility is not enough. A forensic psychologist is consulted again, this time not to build a profile of a killer, but to assess the psychology of waiting, of holding a secret, if one exists, for years without release. The answer is unsettling. Some people can. Especially those whose lives are built on control, routine, compartmentalization. Especially those who never confess because they don't feel hunted. The psychologist emphasizes that absence of visible stress does not equal absence of guilt. It only means the mind has found a way to live with itself. Detectives revisit the idea of motive, the weakest pillar in the case. There is no clear reason why the woman would have been targeted. No money missing that suggests robbery. No known conflict. No documented relationship. But motive, they remind themselves, is not always dramatic. Sometimes it's quiet fixation. Sometimes it's entitlement. Sometimes it's nothing more than access meeting impulse on the wrong night. Those motives don't leave paper trails. They leave atmospheres, and atmospheres are notoriously difficult to introduce as evidence. The apartment itself becomes a focus again, this time in memory rather than reality. The original photographs are enlarged, enhanced, studied until they resemble abstract art. Shadows are traced. Reflections questioned. A mark on the wall once dismissed as scuffing is reconsidered, not as proof, but as possibility. The couch placement is analyzed again. The distance from the door to the table measured with renewed obsession. Every inch becomes a stage where something might have happened without leaving a mark, a choreography of restraint rather than violence. A new tip arrives, anonymous, thin, impossible to verify. Someone claims the man next door once made an offhand comment years later, something about how easy it is for people to disappear in a city like New York, how no one really watches anyone else. The tip contains no date, no witness willing to attach a name. It's the kind of information that would be ignored in a fresh case and agonized over in an old one. Detectives log it, discuss it, argue over whether it adds anything or merely feeds the narrative they're already leaning toward. In the end, it joins the growing archive of almosts. The pressure from above increases. Command staff wants to know if the case is moving towards something actionable or if it's circling indefinitely. Resources are finite. Time is finite. Detectives defend their work, pointing to the coherence of the theory, the convergence of details, the improbability of coincidence at this scale. They stop short of promising an arrest. They've learned better. Cold cases punish certainty more harshly than ignorance. Meanwhile, the man next door begins to feel the weight of scrutiny in ways that don't make the news. Old acquaintances distance themselves. Casual interactions become strained. He is careful where he goes, what he says, how he is perceived. Innocent or not, he is no longer anonymous, and anonymity was once his greatest asset. Some investigators wonder if this pressure might produce a crack, a moment where restraint slips. Others worry it will only drive him deeper into silence, fortified by decades of practice. The city reacts unevenly. Some people grow impatient, demanding resolution, believing that proximity equals guilt, that living next door is explanation enough. Others grow uneasy with that logic, sensing how easily it could be turned on anyone, how quickly suspicion can harden into belief without crossing the threshold of proof. The case becomes a mirror for larger fears, about neighbors, about privacy, about how little we really know the people who share our walls. Late one night, a detective revisits the earliest days of the investigation, reading the first report again as if for the first time. The language is urgent, hopeful, confident in a way only fresh cases are. There's an assumption running through it, an unspoken belief that answers will come quickly, that someone will talk, that evidence will surface. That belief feels naive now, almost painful. The detective wonders how many choices were shaped by that optimism, how many opportunities slipped by because everyone assumed there would be time later. They consider the possibility that the truth may already be in the file, unnoticed because it doesn't announce itself. Cold cases, they know, rarely hinge on a single revelation. They hinge on recognition, the moment when a detail finally aligns with understanding. But recognition requires context, and context has been shifting for decades. What seemed insignificant in 1987 may be glaring now, and what seems glaring now may still be wrong. As Part 6 closes, the investigation feels suspended, stretched between momentum and restraint. No new evidence breaks the surface. No confession arrives. No dramatic twist redefines the story. Instead, the case deepens, becoming heavier, more internal, less about action and more about endurance. The man next door remains what he has always been in this story, close, plausible, and proven. The woman remains absent, her life reduced to documents and memory, her fate still unspoken. And the cold case, older and more complex with each passing year, continues to test the limits of certainty, asking a question it has been asking since 1987, not just who did this, but how much can we ever really know about the people who live closest to us, and whether knowing is always enough to bring the silence to an end. Part 7 begins with a subtle shift, not in evidence, but in tone, as if the case itself has grown tired of being chased and decided to watch instead. The investigation slows its visible pace, not because interest has faded, but because every move now carries consequences. Detectives understand they are no longer collecting facts, they are testing boundaries, legal, ethical, psychological. One wrong step could poison everything they've built, turn years of careful work into noise. The man next door remains the axis, but now he is less a suspect to be pursued and more a variable to be observed, his reactions measured against silence rather than pressure. They begin to study absence as behavior. What he doesn't say, where he doesn't go, how he avoids certain topics without appearing evasive. Surveillance isn't constant, but awareness is. He knows he's being watched, not officially, not openly, but in the way people know when their name has weighed again. His life narrows. He sticks to routines, avoids excess, minimizes exposure. To some investigators, this is self-preservation. To others, it's containment, A man managing risk the only way he knows how. The truth, as always, refuses to declare itself. A new prosecutor reviews the case with fresh eyes, unburdened by years of emotional investment. She asks uncomfortable questions, not about guilt, but about strategy. If this goes forward, what is the story that will be told in court? Not the theory, not the implication, but the sequence of events that can be proven beyond doubt. The room goes quiet. Detectives lay out what they have: proximity, opportunity, behavioral consistency, unresolved forensic hints. She listens, nods, then asks the question no one wants to answer. Where does certainty enter? No one responds immediately. They all know the answer, and they all know it's not enough. The conversation turns to risk. If they push too hard without proof, they risk losing the case forever. Double jeopardy isn't the concern, but credibility is. Once a theory is publicly dismantled, it rarely recovers. The prosecutor advises patience, a word that lands heavily in a room full of people who have already given decades to this story. Patience feels like surrender when time has already stolen so much. But they agree. The case has waited this long. It can wait a little longer if waiting keeps the truth intact. Outside the precinct, the public narrative shifts again. Interest wanes slightly, replaced by new stories, new scandals, new fears. The cold case slips back toward the margins, but not all the way. It lingers in the cultural background, a reference point, a reminder. The phrase "lived next door" remains attached to it like a scar, shorthand for the unease it provokes. People bring it up in conversations about safety, about trust, about how little separation there really is between lives in a city. The woman's family feels the change immediately. Calls become less frequent. Updates less dramatic. They recognize the pattern. They've lived it before. Renewed attention followed by quiet. Hope rising, then settling into something heavier. They don't accuse. They don't plead. They endure. For them, the case isn't stalled, it's suspended, hovering in a space where resolution feels both closer than ever and impossibly far away. Investigators take one last pass through the man's history, not looking for what he did, but for who he was when no one was paying attention. Childhood records. Early friendships. Patterns of isolation or control. Nothing conclusive emerges. No smoking gun. Just a personality shaped by restraint, by boundaries, by an inward-facing life. The kind of person who could exist for years without leaving much of an impression. The kind of person who, if guilty, would have been perfectly suited to disappear someone else without being seen. The building is visited again, not officially, not as a crime scene, but as a place. A detective stands in the hallway alone, listening. The acoustics haven't changed. Sound still travels unpredictably. A radio from one apartment bleeds faintly into another. Footsteps echo, then vanish. It's easy to imagine how something could have happened here without becoming a spectacle. Easy and terrifying. The detective leaves without notes, carrying only the feeling that the space itself understands more than anyone ever will. As months pass, the case enters a waiting phase, not dormant, not closed, but coiled. Detectives check in occasionally, review new technologies, consider future possibilities. DNA science advances. Databases expand. What is impossible today may be routine tomorrow. This belief becomes both comfort and burden, a reason to keep the file alive, a reminder that justice is sometimes paced by innovation rather than will. The man next door continues his life under a quiet shadow. He is not charged. He is not cleared. He exists in between, a state that erodes certainty on both sides. If he is innocent, this limbo is its own punishment. If he is guilty, it is a testament to how thoroughly someone can outrun consequence by never drawing attention in the first place. The ambiguity is corrosive, but it is also honest. The case refuses to pretend it knows what it does not. As Part 7 closes, there is no breakthrough, no revelation waiting around the corner. Instead, there is a recognition, shared silently by everyone involved, that this cold case may not end with a single moment, but with a gradual narrowing, a future where one possibility remains standing simply because all others have fallen away. Until then, the mystery holds its ground, quiet, patient, lodged in the space between two apartments, between two lives, between what can be suspected and what can be said out loud, reminding the city that sometimes the most unsettling stories are not the ones that explode into view, but the ones that never quite let go. Part 8 opens not with movement, but with a question that has grown heavier over time. What does resolution look like when proof refuses to surface? The investigation enters a phase detectives rarely discuss publicly, the long middle distance where certainty erodes and instinct becomes the only compass left. They are no longer chasing a suspect. They're guarding a truth they can't yet speak. The man next door remains unchanged in status, but the case around him subtly rearranges itself, tightening not through action, but through elimination. One by one, alternative explanations lose oxygen, not disproven in a dramatic sense, but starved by the absence of support. The circle grows smaller, quieter, more uncomfortable. A retired detective from the original 1987 team returns to consult, his memory sharper for feelings than facts. He remembers the building more than the paperwork, the way the hallway felt, the unease he couldn't articulate at the time. He admits something he never put in a report, a hesitation he felt about the man next door that he dismissed as bias, as paranoia, as nothing he could justify. Back then, he believed answers would come. Now, decades later, that dismissed instinct resurfaces, not as evidence, but as a reminder that investigations are shaped as much by what officers allow themselves to doubt as by what they pursue. The case is quietly reviewed by an internal panel, not to close it, but to future-proof it. Every decision, every omission, every assumption is re-examined through a modern lens. Could anything have been done differently without the benefit of hindsight? The answer is both no and yes, an unsatisfying truth that hangs over the room. The panel concludes the same thing investigators already know: the case is viable, but fragile. One misstep could collapse the narrative they've carefully protected. For now, restraint remains the strategy. Outside, the city barely notices. New York has always had a talent for absorbing tragedy without stopping. The building blends into its block, anonymous again, the apartment long since altered by other lives. But for those who know the story, the place carries a charge. People lower their voices when they pass it. They glance up at the windows. They imagine radios, half-written notes, doors left ajar. The cold case lives on not as a headline, but as a rumor with weight. Investigators receive a development that is both promising and maddening. Advances in genetic genealogy offer a theoretical path forward, but only if there is a viable sample to work from. They inventory the evidence again, hoping something overlooked might qualify. The reality is harsh. The samples are too degraded, too limited, too compromised by time. The door cracks open, then closes. Progress remains just out of reach, visible enough to torment, distant enough to deny. The man next door ages quietly. Photographs of him now show a different person than the one from 1987, lines etched by time, hair thinning, posture softened. To some, this passage of time humanizes him, complicates the image of a predator frozen in youth. To others, it reinforces the fear that if he did this, he has already enjoyed decades the victim never had. Time becomes a character in the story, neither ally nor enemy, just an unrelenting force that changes everything except the question at the center. The woman's name surfaces again in an unexpected place, a brief mention in a documentary about unresolved disappearances. It's not detailed. It's not investigative. It's atmospheric. A reminder that some stories don't conclude, they linger. Her family watches, conflicted. They want attention, but not this kind, not the shallow retelling that trades depth for mood. Still, they understand the value of memory. Being remembered, even imperfectly, feels better than being forgotten entirely. Within the department, the case becomes something younger detectives are warned about, not as a failure, but as a lesson. They're told this is what happens when crimes are subtle, when violence doesn't announce itself, when the perpetrator, if there is one, understands restraint. They're told to listen harder, to trust discomfort, to document everything, even the things that feel intangible. especially those things. The cold case becomes a training ground, shaping how future investigations will be handled, even if it never delivers its own resolution. A final attempt is made to re-engage the man next door, not through interrogation, but through conversation, a softer approach designed to bypass defenses built over decades. The meeting is cordial. He is polite. He is consistent. He expresses sympathy in careful language, distances himself without hostility. There is no crack, no slip, no moment that can be pointed to later and dissected. When it ends, everyone involved knows this may have been the last chance for something spontaneous, something human, to surface. It doesn't. As the case settles again, investigators confront an uncomfortable truth. They may be closer to understanding what happened than they will ever be to proving it. That gap becomes the defining feature of the story, the space where suspicion lives without confirmation. It's a space the law cannot occupy, but the mind cannot leave alone. The cold case exists there now, fully formed, resistant to closure. Part 8 closes with a quiet reckoning. The investigation remains open, but its urgency has transformed into vigilance. The man next door remains uncharged, but not unconsidered. The woman remains missing, her absence now part of the city's hidden architecture. And the mystery itself, worn smooth by years of attention, continues to endure, not screaming for answers, not begging for justice, but waiting, patiently, for a moment when time, technology, or chance finally decides to break the silence that has held since 1987. Part 9 begins with a realization that arrives quietly and refuses to leave. The case may never end with certainty, but it will always demand a reckoning. Investigators stop framing their work around a future arrest and begin framing it around stewardship, the responsibility of holding a truth in place until the world is ready to receive it. The file is no longer something to solve so much as something to guard, to keep intact against erosion, against forgetting, against the temptation to simplify what has never been simple. The man next door remains at the center of that gravity, a fixed point the case bends around even as time keeps moving. A new generation of detectives rotates in, trained on algorithms and analytics, fluent in data that older investigators once had to imagine. They approach the case with fresh detachment, testing assumptions, stress-testing timelines, running simulations that ask not what is likely, but what is possible. The results don't contradict the long-held theory. If anything, they refine it. The probability models favor proximity. Opportunity clusters where access is routine. The building's layout emerges again as a silent accomplice, its acoustics and habits creating cover where none was intended. Numbers don't prove guilt, but they sharpen intuition into something harder to ignore. The city experiences another small wave of interest when an anniversary passes, a round number that media can't resist. Old footage is replayed. The same photograph circulates. The same phrases return. Cold case, vanished without a trace, suspect lived next door. Commentators debate the ethics of implication, the danger of narrative gravity pulling an uncharged man into infamy. Others argue the greater danger is silence, that unanswered crimes rot the trust that holds communities together. The conversation burns briefly, then cools, leaving behind only the residue of unease. Inside the department, a difficult conversation takes place about legacy. What will this case be remembered as if it never resolves? A cautionary tale? A failure? Or a marker of restraint, proof that the system chose accuracy over appetite? The answer matters to the people who have spent their careers circling this mystery. They decide to document everything anew, not to change the outcome, but to preserve the reasoning, the doubts, the discipline. The case becomes a record not just of a disappearance, but of how seriously the question was taken. The man next door becomes aware, through small signs, that the case has entered a different phase. There are fewer inquiries, fewer rumors, but also fewer chances for absolution. The door to public exoneration never opens, and neither does the door to prosecution. He lives between them, a narrow corridor of ambiguity that mirrors the hallway where it all began. If he is innocent, that corridor is unjust. If he is guilty, it is a testament to how effective restraint can be. The truth remains sealed behind the same wall. The woman's family confronts time in a more personal way. Milestones pass without her. Generations change. The story of her disappearance becomes something that must be explained to people who never knew her, a narrative carried forward by obligation and love. They visit the city less often now, but when they do, they stand near the building and feel the same hollow pull. They do not ask what happened anymore. They ask what can still be done. The answer is small and painful. Remember, document, wait. Investigators revisit the concept of chance, the unpredictable element that cracks cases wide open after decades. A deathbed confession. A forgotten storage unit. A piece of evidence mislabeled and rediscovered. These things happen often enough to keep hope alive and rarely enough to feel cruel. They plan for it anyway, updating protocols, ensuring that if chance does arrive, it won't be squandered. Hope becomes procedural, less emotional, more durable. A quiet ethical debate emerges around the man next door's name, whether it should continue to be associated with the case in internal briefings, whether repetition itself becomes a kind of judgment. The decision is made to keep it, not as an accusation, but as a fact of proximity that cannot be erased. The line between fairness and honesty is thin here, and everyone involved feels it. They choose transparency within the system, restraint outside it. It's an imperfect compromise, but perfection has never been an option. Late one evening, a detective listens again to a recording from 1987, the faint hum of tape, the cadence of a younger voice answering simple questions. There is nothing there that wasn't there before. And yet, hearing it now, with decades layered on top, the detective feels the same chill that has followed this case from the beginning. Not fear. Recognition. The sense that some truths are audible only when you stop expecting them to announce themselves. Part 9 closes with a narrowing of possibilities that feels almost physical. The cold case stands intact, leaner, more defined, stripped of distractions, but still without a door forward. The man next door remains the closest answer without becoming the final one. The woman remains absent, her life a negative space the city learned to build around. And the investigation, steady and unspectacular, continues to do the one thing it can still do with integrity: hold the silence in place, refuse to fill it with convenience, and wait for the moment when something, anything, finally dares to speak. Part 10 carries a different weight, the kind that settles in when everyone involved understands they are approaching an ending, even if they don't know what kind. The investigation is no longer expanding or contracting. It is holding evidence, holding theory, holding silence. Detectives speak less about breakthroughs and more about thresholds, about what it would take to cross from suspicion into action, from narrative into law. That threshold remains visible and unreachable, like a door at the end of a hallway that never quite gets closer no matter how many steps you take. The man next door becomes a quieter presence in the file, not because he matters less, but because everything that can be said about him has already been said. His proximity, his access, his consistency, his silence. These facts are now fixed points, not lines of inquiry. Investigators stop asking new questions about him and start asking whether the system itself is capable of finishing a story like this. Cold cases, they know, don't always end with answers. Sometimes they end with decisions. A final comprehensive review is ordered, not to chase a miracle, but to ensure nothing remains unchecked. Every piece of evidence is handled again. Every note reread. Every assumption challenged one last time. It is an exhausting process, emotionally and intellectually, because it forces everyone to confront the limits of their work. When it concludes, the result is what they expected and feared. The case is strong in theory, weak in court, balanced on a knife edge that cannot support a charge without collapsing. The question becomes not who did this, but what responsibility remains. Can a case be considered active if it has nowhere to go? Can justice exist without a verdict? The answers vary depending on who you ask. Prosecutors speak of thresholds. Detectives speak of truth. The family speaks of absence. None of these perspectives cancel the others out. The woman's name appears again, this time in a quiet internal memo marking another year since her disappearance. No press release. No public statement. Just a line in a system that refuses to let her vanish completely. For the people who have carried her story this long, that matters. It is a small defiance against erasure, against the idea that time alone can close a case. The man next door is informed, indirectly, that the investigation has stabilized. There will be no immediate action. No charges. No exoneration. The message is not delivered ceremonially. It arrives through absence, through the slowing of contact, through the return of anonymity that never fully returns. He is older now, living in the long echo of a moment that may or may not define him. If he is innocent, this is the closest thing to relief he will ever receive. If he is guilty, it is the confirmation that silence has worked. Detectives wrestle with that possibility in private. The idea that someone could commit an act this absolute and carry it quietly for a lifetime is difficult to accept, not because it is rare, but because it contradicts the stories people tell themselves about guilt. They want remorse to surface. They want cracks. They want truth to behave dramatically. This case has taught them otherwise. It has taught them that restraint can be as powerful as violence, that absence can be more durable than evidence. The building remains unchanged, its significance invisible to those who don't know the story. New tenants pass through the apartment where the radio once played, unaware that their lives intersect with an unresolved history. Detectives stop visiting. There is nothing left to measure, nothing left to test. The space has given everything it can give. What remains is interpretation. As the case edges toward a procedural pause, not a closure, but a holding pattern that could last indefinitely, there is a quiet acknowledgement among those involved that this may be the final shape of the story. Not solved. Not forgotten. Suspended. The cold case becomes a permanent question mark, a reminder that some truths exist outside the reach of institutions built to contain them. Part 10 does not end with despair. It ends with clarity. The clarity that comes from knowing exactly where the limits are. The clarity of understanding that justice is not always an event. Sometimes it is a posture, a refusal to lie to oneself for the sake of comfort. The investigators have not failed. They have arrived at the edge and stopped rather than stepping into fiction. The man next door remains a shadow without a verdict. The woman remains missing, her life unresolved but not erased. The city moves on, as it always does, carrying the story quietly in its infrastructure, in its shared walls and thin hallways. And the cold case, now fully grown, takes its final form not as a puzzle waiting to be solved, but as an enduring truth the city must live beside, just as it always has on the other side of the wall. Part 11 arrives without ceremony, the way endings often do in real life, not with answers, but with acceptance sharpened by time. The case does not close. It settles. It finds its final posture not in a courtroom or a headline, but in the collective understanding of everyone who touched it and everyone who lived near it, physically or emotionally. The cold case becomes less a question and more a presence, something that occupies space without demanding resolution, something learned rather than solved. Inside the department, the file is placed where unsolved cases live, not buried, not elevated, simply preserved. It carries annotations from multiple generations of investigators, different handwriting, different language, all circling the same silence. New technologies will come. They always do, and when they arrive the case will be pulled again, held up to fresh light, tested against new possibilities. That promise remains. But for now, there is nothing left to do but keep the record honest. No forced conclusions. No convenient endings. Just the truth as far as it can be carried. The woman's name endures in that file, no longer just as a victim, but as a measure of restraint. Her disappearance becomes the reason procedures were rewritten, why instincts are now documented instead of dismissed, why proximity is weighed more carefully than it once was. She is remembered not only for how she vanished, but for what her absence taught the people who kept looking. In that way, she remains present, shaping outcomes she will never see. The man next door fades back into the city, not absolved, not accused, but permanently adjacent to a story that refuses to detach from him. His life continues in the narrow corridor between suspicion and silence. Every door he closes echoes differently now, even if no one else hears it. Whether he carries guilt or only the weight of association is a question the system cannot answer and perhaps never will. The ambiguity follows him like a shadow that never quite aligns with the light. The building stands, indifferent and enduring, brick and mortar outliving memory, housing new lives unaware of the history embedded in its walls. Radios still play there. Notes are still written on counters and left unfinished for harmless reasons. Doors are still left ajar by accident. Ordinary life continues, which is both comforting and unsettling, because it proves how easily the extraordinary can be absorbed, how completely a place can move on while a question remains suspended inside it. For the city, the story becomes one more quiet scar, rarely spoken aloud, but never fully forgotten. It surfaces in conversations about trust, about neighbors, about the strange intimacy of shared walls. It lingers in the way people listen more closely now, in the way silence is no longer assumed to be harmless. The cold case reshapes behavior subtly, invisibly, the way unresolved things often do. There is no final revelation waiting at the end of this narrative. No confession breaking decades of quiet. No evidence emerging at the last second to reframe everything. What remains instead is something harder and more honest. The recognition that some mysteries do not yield to persistence alone. That some truths exist without witnesses. That justice is sometimes measured not by punishment, but by refusal to pretend. The investigation ends where it began, with a door, a wall, a silence that means more than it should. The radio from that night is long gone, but its echo remains, a symbol of how normal everything looked until it wasn't. A life disappeared. A community absorbed the shock. A cold case took root and never let go. And so the story concludes not with certainty, but with vigilance. The file stays open. The memory stays alive. The question remains intact. Somewhere between two apartments, between what can be proven and what can be known, the cold case continues to exist, not screaming for attention, not begging for closure, just waiting. Reminding anyone who listens that sometimes the most haunting stories are not the ones that end badly, but the ones that never truly end at all. Part 12 does not announce itself as an addition, because in a case like this there is no such thing as an extra chapter, only the continuation of something that never truly stopped. Time advances, not with urgency, but with quiet insistence, and the cold case adapts the way unresolved things always do, by embedding itself deeper into routine. The file remains open in theory and dormant in practice, a contradiction everyone involved has learned to live with. It sits on a shelf, but it is never at rest, because rest would imply completion, and completion has never belonged to this story. Years pass. Faces change. Some of the detectives who once carried the weight of this case retire, their badges turned in, their desks cleared, their memories becoming the last place where certain details still exist in full color. Before they leave, they brief those who will replace them, not just on facts, but on tone, on the things that don't translate well into reports. They talk about the hallway. They talk about the radio. They talk about the feeling you get when a theory makes too much sense to be comfortable. These warnings are given quietly, without drama, because this case has taught them that drama is rarely where truth lives. The woman's family grows smaller with time, not in love, but in numbers. Parents age. Siblings become elders. The disappearance shifts from a present pain to a carried one, something that has always been there and always will be. They mark anniversaries privately now. No press. No interviews. Just remembrance. They understand something the public often doesn't, that closure is not an event, it's a compromise, a way of living forward without answers while refusing to let go of the question entirely. The man next door becomes an old man. His name appears less frequently in internal discussions, not because its relevance has faded, but because nothing new attaches itself to it. He has outlived suspicion without escaping it. In some ways, that is its own sentence. In others, it is a mercy that only time can deliver. The Those who still remember the case debate quietly whether justice delayed can become justice denied, or whether restraint itself is a form of justice when certainty is absent. There is no consensus. There never is. Technology continues its relentless advance, indifferent to human patience. Databases merge. Algorithms grow sharper. What once required intuition now requires processing power. Periodically, the case is pulled and run through systems that didn't exist before, its fragments tested against a world of new information. Each time, the result is the same. No contradiction. No confirmation. The silence holds. But with every pass, the confidence grows that if the truth ever becomes detectable, this case will be ready to recognize it. The building remains, increasingly ordinary as the city reshapes itself around it. Renovations come and go. Tenants cycle through. None of them know the full story, and those who do know rarely speak of it. The apartment where it all began has been remodeled more than once, walls repainted, floors replaced, history sealed beneath layers of improvement. Yet something intangible lingers, not as a haunting, but as awareness, a sense that spaces remember even when people don't. Occasionally, a new detective stumbles onto the case late at night, flipping through old files out of curiosity rather than assignment. They read the reports, study the photographs, trace the logic, and almost always arrive at the same point. The man next door. The shared wall. The absence of struggle. The quiet. They feel the same chill their predecessors felt, the same pull toward an answer that refuses to solidify. And in that moment, the case renews itself, not through action, but through recognition. The cold case becomes part of institutional memory, cited in training, referenced in policy discussions, used as an example of why investigators are taught to document discomfort as carefully as evidence. It changes how questions are asked, how assumptions are challenged, how proximity is treated not as coincidence, but as context. In this way, the woman's disappearance continues to shape outcomes, influencing cases that will never bear her name. There is a temptation, as time stretches on, to mythologize the story, to turn it into something larger than it was, more elaborate, more theatrical. Those closest to it resist that impulse. They know the truth, if it exists, is likely small, contained, painfully human. Not a mastermind. Not a spectacle. Just a moment where access, impulse, and silence aligned. That restraint keeps the case grounded, even as it ages into legend. At some point, someone will be the last person alive who remembers the night it happened as news rather than history. That moment will pass without notice. The case will not end then. It will simply shift again, from lived memory to recorded one. And even then, it will persist, because unanswered questions have a way of surviving their witnesses. Part 12 does not close the story. It reinforces what the story has always been. A life interrupted. A truth suspected. A silence respected because breaking it without certainty would create a different kind of harm. The cold case remains what it has become over decades, not a failure, not a success, but a testament to the limits of knowing and the discipline required to accept those limits without surrendering to them. Somewhere in New York, walls are shared tonight. Radios play softly. Doors close without locking into anything final. And beneath the noise of the city, beneath the movement and the forgetting, the cold case continues to exist exactly where it always has, in the narrow, uneasy space between proximity and proof, reminding anyone willing to listen that not all stories are meant to resolve, but all of them demand to be remembered. Part 13 unfolds like an echo rather than a step forward, the sound of something long past bouncing faintly off new walls. The case enters a phase no one plans for, but everyone eventually recognizes, the era when it no longer belongs to any one investigator, family member, or generation, but to the city itself. It becomes woven into the background knowledge of New York, not famous enough to be folklore, not fresh enough to be urgent, yet persistent enough to resist disappearance. The cold case survives the way certain streets survive, renamed, repainted, rerouted, but never truly erased. A small administrative change triggers a familiar ritual. The department migrates its archives to a new system, digitizing what was once paper, scanning photographs that have curled at the edges, converting tapes whose magnetic memory is beginning to fail. The woman's file is processed again, line by line, artifact by artifact. Nothing new emerges, but nothing is lost either. The act itself feels symbolic, a recommitment to preservation over progress, a recognition that even if answers never arrive, the record must remain intact, waiting. Younger analysts notice something their predecessors couldn't afford to dwell on: how consistent the silence is. Not just from the man next door, but from the case itself. No chaotic spikes. No contradictory trails. No sudden deviations. It is a straight, quiet absence, uninterrupted. That kind of consistency, they note, is rare. Crimes usually ripple outward, disturbing other parts of a life, leaving collateral traces. This one did not. Whatever happened was contained, disciplined, almost surgical in its restraint. The observation is unsettling, not because it changes anything, but because it reinforces everything that has already been suspected. The woman's story resurfaces briefly in an academic context, cited in a study about urban disappearances and the psychology of proximity. Her name is one among many, anonymized, contextualized, abstracted into data points. The family is informed out of courtesy. They approve. They have learned that meaning sometimes travels through places they never intended. If her disappearance can help others understand risk, silence, or prevention, then it has at least resisted total futility. Still, seeing her life reduced to variables stings in ways no headline ever did. The man next door does not appear in that study. He remains a shadow outside formal conclusions, present in implication but absent in print. This omission is deliberate, a nod to the boundary that has never been crossed. Even now, even this late, restraint governs the narrative. It is the one rule the case has never broken. Occasionally, a rumor surfaces, usually online, usually from someone claiming secondhand knowledge, a friend of a friend who heard something years ago. Each rumor is checked. Each one collapses. The process is automatic now, efficient, unemotional. The cold case has taught the system how to filter noise without becoming numb to possibility. That balance, fragile and hard-earned, may be its greatest legacy. The building changes again. Another renovation. Another owner. The hallway where so much imagination has lingered is brightened, widened slightly, modernized. The wall between the two apartments is reinforced to meet new codes. Thicker now. More soundproof. A practical improvement that carries an unintended irony. Whatever once passed through that space would not pass now. The past remains sealed on its side of the drywall. For those who know the story, this detail lands with quiet weight. It feels like a metaphor no one asked for. The present correcting a vulnerability the past exploited. Too late to matter. Just in time to remind. Within the department, the case reaches a kind of equilibrium. It is no longer actively pursued, but it is never closed. Its status is reviewed at regular intervals, a procedural heartbeat that confirms its continued existence. Detectives assigned to it learn quickly that their role is custodial rather than heroic. They are caretakers of a question, not conquerors of it. That mindset changes how they see their work, how they measure success. The city continues to produce new mysteries, louder ones, messier ones, cases that demand immediate answers and deliver them with varying degrees of satisfaction. Against that noise, this cold case grows quieter, but also clearer. Its outline sharpens as distractions fall away. What remains is the simplest version of the story. A woman disappeared from her home. No signs of force, no evidence of escape, no confirmed witness, and a neighbor close enough to matter forever. As years stack upon years, the idea of resolution begins to feel less important than the idea of vigilance. The lesson hardens into policy, into instinct, into training that emphasizes attention to the ordinary. Investigators are taught that danger does not always look like chaos. Sometimes it looks like routine. Sometimes it looks like nothing at all. Part 13 does not move the story forward. It presses it deeper. Deeper into memory. Deeper into infrastructure. deeper into the collective understanding of how fragile certainty can be. The cold case no longer waits for a knock at the door or a confession whispered too late. It waits for alignment, for the rare moment when truth and proof decide to occupy the same space. Until then, it remains what it has always been. A life interrupted. A silence maintained. A wall that once separated two apartments and now separates what is known from what can be said. And in that narrow space, unchanged by time but sharpened by it, the cold case continues, patient, unresolved, and impossible to forget. Part 14 settles into the story like a long exhale, the moment after everyone realizes the case has outlived urgency and learned how to survive without it. The cold case no longer waits for rescue. It has become self-sustaining, anchored in procedure, memory, and an unspoken agreement that some truths are guarded, not chased. The city has changed its skyline again, cranes rising where old buildings once stood, but the disappearance remains untouched by development, immune to reinvention. It exists outside trends, outside cycles, fixed in the year it began and carried forward intact. A minor administrative event brings the case briefly back into motion. A box of archived property from the late 80s is discovered during a routine audit, mislabeled, untouched for years. It's not dramatic. No one runs. No alarm sound. But when the contents are laid out on a table, gloved hands hovering over brittle paper and sealed envelopes, the room grows quiet in a way that feels familiar. The items are reviewed carefully. A duplicate photograph. An old evidence log. Nothing new. Nothing missing. The silence remains complete. Still, the ritual matters. The system checks itself and confirms that nothing slipped through unseen. One of the younger detectives assigned to the cold case lingers after the review, staring at the photographs longer than necessary. He wasn't alive in 1987. For him, the case has always been historical, something inherited rather than experienced. And yet, the pull is immediate. He notices how ordinary everything looks, how unremarkable the apartment appears, how easily this could happen again, anywhere, anytime, without spectacle. The realization is unsettling. The danger was never the crime. It was the quiet. The woman's absence continues to ripple outward in subtle ways. Her name surfaces occasionally in policy discussions, cited without fanfare, shorthand for a category of cases that defy closure. She is not remembered loudly. She is remembered correctly. That distinction becomes important as years pass and stories soften around their edges. Her disappearance resists romanticization. It stays stark. A life stopped. No explanation offered. The man next door becomes less a person and more a constant variable in the narrative, his presence fixed in the same way a known landmark is fixed on a map. He is referenced carefully, always with qualifiers, always with restraint. Time has eroded public interest in him, but it has not erased institutional awareness. He remains adjacent, permanently, a proximity that cannot be undone by age or distance. Even if his name were forgotten, his position in the story would remain, a silhouette defined by where he stood, not by what can be proven. Occasionally, the case is mentioned in passing by officers responding to unrelated calls in the same neighborhood. Not officially. Just a glance at a building, a quiet acknowledgement between colleagues who know. The story has become part of the local professional folklore, not exaggerated, not embellished, just present. A reminder passed down in low voices. Pay attention. Listen harder. Ordinary doesn't mean safe. The family continues its quiet vigilance. They no longer expect answers. What they expect is continuity. That the case remains open. That the file remains accessible. That her name is not reduced to a footnote or a statistic. They understand now that justice, in this context, is maintenance. It is the refusal to let the story decay. It is the insistence that disappearance does not equal erasure. New technologies are discussed again, as they always are, each innovation briefly raising the question of whether this might finally be the one. Each time, the answer is measured and honest. Not yet. Maybe never. The hope is not abandoned, but it is disciplined, kept in proportion, protected from the kind of optimism that leads to mistakes. The cold case has taught the department how to hope without hallucinating. The building itself fades further into anonymity, another address among thousands. But the wall between the two apartments, now reinforced, now thicker than it ever was, carries symbolic weight for those who know the story. It stands as proof that environments learn, even when people cannot. That vulnerability, once